This is not actually a Limp Bizkit concert. Welcome back to Rewind of the Living Dead. I'm Damon Martin.
And I'm DJ Patrick G.
And Patrick G, this week we are traveling back to our youth. We love to say on this show that we are children of the 80s because we grew up in the 80s when that was like the golden era of slasher horror films. But the reality is, we are really children of the 90s. We were very little kids in the 80s. We were actually teenage years of the 90s. And we are reviewing the ultimate 90s throwback tonight, Y2K.
Oh, Damon, Y2K released in December of 2024, starring, a whole lot of people. Tim Heidecker as Howard, Alicia Silverstone, a 90s classic as Robin, Lauren Malone as Raleigh, the Kid Leroy as Soccer, Chris Mason Gooding as Jonas, Eduardo Franco as Farkas, Kyle Mooney as Garrett, Fred Durst as fucking Fred Durst, Lachlan Watson as Ash, Daniel Zogardi as CJ, Julian Dennison as Danny, Rachel Zegler as Laura, and starring Jaden Martell as Eli. As you mentioned, Damon, written by Evan Winter and Kyle Mooney and directed by Kyle Mooney. We're talking Y2K, Damon. Get out the wide leg pants. Get out your studded choker. Your spike tips. It's all happening right now because you and I were indeed teenagers in the 90s. And more specifically, like, I think we go down that lane all the time of, like, you know, what it was like growing up as little kids in the 80s. We remember a lot about that. We remember a lot about being young in the 90s. But when you're actually almost like a high school graduate, that's some of your best years ever. That's some of the most fun. Like, 17 was probably my favorite age of all my ages to be. It really was genuinely my favorite time. Y2K takes me exactly back to that specific time period, Damon, and I'm just gonna spoil this right off the top. I will love this movie forever because it is a true snapshot of what it was like being almost an adult. And it's a perfect representation of it.
So we've talked in this show before. We did reviews of like Stranger Things, and I've talked about how much I loved that show because it was a really good representation of what the 80s were like, because that was when we were kids. We were little kids in the 80s, and I thought, and I've always thought, Stranger Things did a pretty good job of adapting that and modernizing it for this era. Because a lot of times, and I think we've talked about this on the show before, when movies do throwbacks to 70s, 80s, whatever, sometimes it gets a little cheesy. Sometimes they just don't get it right. The vibe isn't right. The dialogue isn't right. Whatever the case may be, it just doesn't feel authentic. And I've criticized films for that in the past, especially movies that, like, especially when they try to go back to the 70s. I think it's a lot harder to, the further back you go, the harder it is to get it right. But the 80s were such an iconic era, and it almost feels like some filmmakers or showrunners think that if you just take someone and spray their hair up with Aquanet and put on some 80s music and put people in Jordache jeans, that's your representation of an 80s movie. But it's not. It goes farther beyond that, which is why I appreciate the detail in a show like Stranger Things. Y2K, I said this watching the movie when I saw it a few nights ago with my girlfriend, and I said it to you right before right after you saw it, and I'm saying it again tonight. This movie really scratched me right where I itch. Like, this was such this was high school. This like spoke to me. And listen, to be fair, I understand, like, our audience ranges in age. There's going to be a lot of our audience who are going to be like, oh yeah, I remember that time. I definitely remember the late 90s, early 2000s. There's going to be part of our audience who's like, I have no idea what any of this shit is. But I promise you that it feels real, it feels authentic, and it's just so much fun. And you know my opinion, like, it's harder to impress me with a horror comedy because to me it's difficult to strike the right balance of horror, comedy, and also just not making it ludicrous. I don't like overly jokey films like that when it comes to horror. Y2K fits, like, perfectly in that middle ground of, like, it's hilarious. There's definitely some horrific moments. It never takes itself too seriously. I said this to you off air. I'll say it again now. This movie, to me, felt like Superbad ran headfirst into Zombieland, and it was like the perfect amalgamation of a horror comedy for me.
Yeah, I think it's very apropos. I think that's the perfect way to like describe this movie. I do think it leans almost more heavy on comedy than anything else. But the good news is, you know, we're a horror podcast and there's definitely a horror element to this movie. You know, like I think I saw one trailer and that was all I needed to see to know that Kyle Mooney probably really loved as a kid Maximum Overdrive, which I know you and I love too. Like he's Kyle Mooney's I think just a couple years younger than us. But like clearly he was like, what if we did Maximum Overdrive but in Y2K, because that's the perfect time because we were sure that the world was going to absolutely implode. And so it's a great way to kind of sneak around doing a remake to Maximum Overdrive while making it funny because Maximum Overdrive was funny without intending to be funny because Stephen King was coked out of his mind when he made it, and it sure looks like that on screen. And so I really appreciate the idea that like nowadays it's tough to get a comedy on screens, on the big screen. It's just they don't sell anymore. So very smartly, A24, Kyle Mooney get together and they go, if we wrap it up in a horror movie, we can kind of get away with just making a comedy that people will go see and laugh and enjoy. And it's also going to be a horror film, so we know those do well. We know those bring people in. I don't know if it was that targeted, but I know some executive was like, well, that's kind of perfect. It's the perfect excuse to put a comedy out there because this is a very, very funny movie. I should have put at the very end instead of is it scary, is it funny? Because it's fucking hilarious. Even if you're not from that era, you can enjoy the humor that's in this movie. And this is a very simple movie, Damon. I think like the premise that you explained in the talk up, it's very easy. Like this is a coming of age high school party movie. You've got this kid Eli. He's got a huge crush on oh god,
Laura.
on Laura. Okay, he's got this huge crush on Laura. His best friend Danny is like the outgoing funny guy, and he's like, dude, we're gonna go to this Y2K party tonight. You're gonna kiss her, and she's gonna become the love of your life, and then we're gonna go off to college, and everything's gonna be rad. Like they do all that in the first act, like very efficiently, very quickly. They just get to the fact that we're gonna get to this party. So what you would normally do in a movie like Superbad that takes you all the movie to get to the party, to get to the girl, they do that in the first act. In the first 15 minutes, it's set. Then the countdown happens and it's Y2K and the lights go out. This is all in the trailer, so I'm not spoiling a damn thing. And the robots take over, and then they're in a fight for their lives. I almost wish more coming of age movies did this because it's just like we know the formula already. We know how it's going to play out. So they just said, hey, let's put that formula right up front and then let's get to the mayhem, the blood, the guts, and way more comedy.
So, like, one of my all-time favorite comedies is Superbad. I quote that movie constantly. I love that movie. Like, if you're trying to peg me down to like my favorite coming-of-age teen story, Superbad may top that list. That movie to this day absolutely cracks me up. And that movie did so many things right with the friendship and the bond with with Evan and Seth, and then you throw in why am I forgetting his name?
McLovin.
McLovin, thank you. You throw in that in the mix and the girls and Emma. It was just the perfect teen comedy of that era. And also, much like American Pie, it stopped skirting the PG-13 line. It went to a hard
Right.
R. They're just like, we're not going to play this PG-13 bullshit. We're going to go to R. And I've always said you can make a funny movie as a PG-13 movie, but I truly believe the best comedies are R-rated comedies. My personal belief. When I think about my favorite comedies, I would say the vast majority are R-rated. Superbad is one of those movies for me. Now, Superbad was clearly influenced by other movies, that came before it. I mean, if you've heard interviews with Evan Goldberg and Seth Rogen, who wrote the movie, they've said like we were influenced by this movie from the '80s and Ferris Bueller's Day Off and so on and so forth. So every movie that has come before something comes after something else has been influenced by something before it. But here's where my critique comes in and why I think Y2K works so well. There was a movie that came out a few years ago called Booksmart directed by the amazing Olivia Wilde, who I think is an incredible actor, and I think she's a great director as well. Booksmart was fun. It was fine, but it felt like the DNA in that movie was too similar to Superbad. They just took the DNA of that movie and implanted girls in the lead role versus the guys. And while it was charming and it definitely had some funny moments, I felt like I was watching a lesser Superbad. And I understand that was a very common criticism of that movie at the time. A lot of people loved that movie. I thought it was okay, but it just felt like it shared too much DNA with Superbad. It was like I'm just watching almost the same movie made over again, except the girls are the lead characters. What Y2K does so smartly, when this movie started, I joked, not even knowing, by the way, Jonah Hill is actually a producer on this movie. I had no idea going into it he was a producer on this movie. But when you meet Eli and Danny, Eli very much feels like Evan from Superbad, and Danny feels very much like Seth from Superbad, the Jonah Hill character. And I turned to my girlfriend at the start of the movie when they introduced Danny, and he's actually working out in a Tybo video with his mother, which was hilarious. Everyone in the 90s should remember Billy Blanks. When he started making jokes and kind of being the outspoken funny guy, I turned to my girlfriend and I said, "Oh, it's New Zealand Jonah Hill." Because he was just that character. And I was like, "Oh, okay, I see what they're doing here." Now, that being said, what you mentioned is the perfect way to divert this movie. It is 100% the first 20, 25 minutes is just Superbad in the 90s, or however you are, buddy, teen comedy, teen party comedy of the 90s. And I know that Kyle Mooney said he was heavily influenced by Can't Hardly Wait, which is a great movie from that era. But then when you inject the Y2K of it all, where the machines actually, because again, what Kyle Mooney said, I read the interviews with him, he said that, like, I don't know how much you remember about the Y2K phenomenon in 99, but everyone, like, people were turning their homes into, like, fallout shelters. They thought the world was going to come to an end. Like, that's how bad it got. It was like stores were selling out of water, toilet paper. Like, you thought the pandemic was crazy. If you were around in 1999, you remember how insane people got thinking the world was just going to come to an absolute brutal end because of a weird computer error where they used 2 digits instead of 4 digits for the year, and they thought when it switched over from 99 to 2000, the world was going to melt down. Now, absolutely nothing happened. Nothing at all happened. It was like the weird, and Kyle Mooney said it was like the biggest letdown because he was like expecting like the apocalypse, and then they're just like, yeah, nothing happened. So his idea was like, what happens if it all did go wrong? And so when you inject that Superbad influence story, and then you take it and turn it into what is the horror part of this, which is the machines turning against us and machines teaming up to turn against us, it just becomes its own thing. And I think to me, that's the brilliant way you can take inspiration from another film and then make it into your own thing. And I think that's what Kyle Mooney and Evan Winter did so brilliantly, because they took the elements, the DNA of Superbad, but then they took it out of just the teen party and these two guys trying to get laid. And it's about literally an entire group of teens trying to survive the end of the world. What just a brilliant way to kind of turn it on its head.
I really hope that more people who want to do comedies try this formula out. Now, I don't know how well Y2K is going to do. I don't think it's probably not scratching the top 3 at the box office. I hope it does though. Like, I really do. Like, first of all, the only other genre that is great to see with a crowd aside from horror is comedy. It's the shared experience is so great. So when you're in a theater with a bunch of people, and I went to a really, really late showing, so it was just a smattering of people, but everybody in that audience was laughing their ass off. And it was like we had this little group thing going on. Like, we were all hanging out there, enjoying each other's time and enjoying what was on screen and laughing our asses off. And boy, I was easily the loudest in that room that night. That's fun. And comedy is having a tough time at the box office. Wrap it up in a horror movie. Now, you got to be careful, because then you end up with things like Scary Movie, which I absolutely hate, and like all those other like parody horror movies that are kind of ridiculous. And I think they just had a run. Like, there was just a time when there was a simple formula that worked. I'm hoping that the writers of today and the directors and creatives of today are a little more creative with how they approach it. But this is a good way for comedies to get back in to the theaters with and still have a little bit of success. I'm sure they didn't spend a ton of money on this. I don't have the budget in front of me, but I doubt it was a high budget movie. But it delivers on everything you ask for. Whatever's in that trailer that you're looking forward to, I promise you they exceed it. They really do. Like they exceed it on all levels. It's not a scary movie. I'm here to tell you that right now. Excuse me. This is not a scary movie. This is a comedy that happens to be a horror movie as well. So there's blood and guts, and there's terror because these kids are trying to save their lives. But this is ultimately meant to make you laugh. This is all ultimately meant to give you a good time. And a lot of horror people are looking for that, and they get it. You will get it with Y2K. It's a great theater experience. You know, Damon and I are always trying to push you to go back to the theaters because we love that experience. This is the perfect kind of movie to go do it with. And we're entering the holiday season, so hopefully they kind of keep it in theaters. They keep like one in every major, cinemaplex. And go see it. Go see it with a group and laugh. Go take a bunch of your friends and laugh and have a good time. You will have a good time at this movie. Now I'm going to jump off that soapbox, Damon, because I think if you tune into Rewind to Living Dead every week, you know Damon and I are going to push you to go to the theaters. I want to now go. I want to take this and make a personal moment out of this, Damon. Take me back to 1999. Damon Martin, what were you wearing in 1999? Because I know what I was wearing for sure.
So what's funny is, I don't know if this is good or bad. My wardrobe from like 1999 has largely stayed the same through now, which is blue jeans and black t-shirts. I've just been a black t-shirt. Now, when the grunge phase first started, when I was still very little, I was still a kid at that point, when the grunge phase started in the early 90s. And that's really when I got into music for the first time. Everything I listened to in the 80s when I was a little kid was influenced by my older sister. And she loved Prince and, 80s music, whatever's big at that time, whatever's on the radio. The 90s are where I started to form my own opinion on music. And so I got really into Pearl Jam, Nirvana, Soundgarden, Candlebox, Alice in Chains. I was very much into that Seattle sound. But then as the late 90s started to roll around, bands like The Offspring came around and you started getting, Green Day and I got into, even though they've been around much longer than that, I got into heavier stuff like Metallica and Megadeth and Slayer and things like that. So I went from like the grunge of like torn up jeans and chucks and flannel shirts to black t-shirts, black baggy jeans, chain wallet, studded necklace around my neck, and I had insanely spiked hair. I had like do you remember, he sadly passed away, do you remember Wayne Static from Static X? He had like the ginormous,
I loved Static X.
Mine wasn't quite like that, but I definitely had like the giant spiked hair. Like it was full on spike. Like I told the story before the podcast, or when I went to Vegas one time in the early 2000s when I was still very young, like right after turning 21, a girl walked up to me at the Hard Rock Hotel and was like, "Are you the singer from Papa Roach?" Like that's how spiked up my hair looked, as I looked like the singer from Papa Roach. I was like, "I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing." At the time, Last Resort was huge, so I was like, "All right, cool." But that was me. Giant spiked hair, like enough. I put so much gel in my hair, I could have stabbed someone like a rhinoceros. And like I said, I had the spiked the collar. Oh, I had the spiked jean belt. Don't forget about that. I had the spiked belt, the punk belt, black or dark blue jeans, the big baggy jeans, and then, as I said, I wore Chucks, and then I slowly transitioned into Adidas because everyone had to wear Adidas at that point, or Vans, or like DC shoes, like of that skate era, like Etnies got big at that time, and then usually it was a black T-shirt of some band at that point. So like in that era, it was Korn, it was that's right around the time I think System of a Down came out. Again, I said, Slayer, Megadeth. So yeah, it was a band T-shirt, dark jeans, baggy jeans, giant chain wallet, and then some version of like Vans or DC shoes or Adidas.
Fantastic, Damon. It really does bring me back. It really does. I was I was into all the grunge stuff too, but I was the guy who, especially right around 97, 98, I started rapping. Like I was a rapper in high school. I was in like a rap crew, and were a big thing back then. Like if you were in a crew, it was like such a big deal, and they even talk about that in this movie, and we'll get to that. But you had me in the large leg JNCO jeans, or like Dickies size 44. Now, Damon, you know I'm not a big guy, okay? I got a decent enough slim waist. Like I'm like a 31 on a good day, okay? Back then, I was like a twig. You know what I mean? Like I'm a high schooler. I'm 16, 17 years old. I was like a buck 20. I might have been a jean size 26, but I was wearing like size 44 Dickies, like cut so that the leg was like super wide over my shell toe Adidas. I always had on a skate shirt. Never mind that I didn't skate, but I always had a skate shirt on or a hip hop shirt on, a bucket hat, a backpack. I'd have studio headphones over my neck, hooked up to my Walkman that was still playing cassette tapes because that was still the hot shit. I was like a weird hip hop metal hybrid because I remember I was the one rapper who would actually incorporate like rock lyrics and like rock references in my raps and stuff like that. And like I would bring rock samples for like underground metal bands to our sessions and be like, "Oh, sample this. This is from some like black metal band in like Sweden." Like that's the kind of weirdo I was. I would do shit like that. So, it was so funny because I think like the way you were dressed and the way I was dressed were 100% represented. I didn't have the spiky hair back then. I had a shaved head. I started doing the spiky hair like in the early 2000s. But I was definitely doing it where it's like hairspray the shit out of it and like blow dry it up and all that. Oh my God. It was all there. And it's so funny to see. There's a great little sequence in the movie before shit really pops off where the camera just swings through the party that they're at and shows all the different cliques. Like all the fucking sports boys who had puka shells. Like I think I might have had puka shells. Like maybe somebody gave them to me or some shit. But I used to rock like little wooden beads and shit and necklaces like that. Then they'd swing over and it was like the hip hop heads, which is who I hung out with. And then the kids who were like listening to Korn, which some of them kind of look like a Damon Martin to me. Like I was just seeing all these different little groups and I was like, God damn, they're taking me down memory lane in a way I never thought I'd see on screen.
Yeah, it was like I said, and I mean this in all sincerity. Like we always love to talk about being kids of the '80s, and we were literally kids of the '80s. But our formative years were the '90s. So this was us. Like this was our formative years. Were these years in the '90s? So this movie it was. I was like back in high school in a lot of ways, and it was now like you said, 17 was your best year. I wouldn't say my high school years were my best years. I'd say my college years were my best years, but I definitely remember that era, and the click thing was 110% true. Like you went to a big high school in San Diego. I went to a no school, like a tiny little school here in Ohio. My graduating class was 95. Like we didn't have like hardly anybody there, but we all had the clicks. Don't worry. We definitely had the same clicks. So when they did, it reminded me, have you seen the movie Disturbing Behavior? It was a great early 2000s movie. They do that in that movie where the new kids show up to this little town outside of Washington, and they pan around the school. Here's the hip hop heads, here's the gear heads, here's the metal kids, here's the popular football player kids, whatever. And you could do, and they do that. By the way, that's not just exclusive to that movie. They do it in Heathers. They do it in a lot of these teen movies where they pan around the cafeteria and you find the different groups. But it's authentic. It's genuine and this one, man, I was like, Jesus Christ, did they just take a snapshot of my 90s? Like, did they just literally go to my high school and like here? Like, it was like unironically, like almost like mind boggling how accurate it was. Now, I will butt heads with one minor detail, and this is not a spoiler. I guess it's kind of a minor spoiler, but it's not. It has nothing to do with the story. In the movie, the two lead characters, Eli and Danny, they are the social outcasts of everybody. Like they are their own little dorky commune of two guys. They don't really hang around anybody else. They don't fit into any of these cliques. They're their own clique, right? At one point, they go to a convenience store, and on their way out, they run into the metal kids, the metal hip hop kids, which is like a hybrid a little bit in this movie. And the one character who is played by someone you should recognize. He's played by Eduardo Franco, who is from Stranger Things. You should all remember him from Stranger Things. He kind of bullies them and kind of makes fun of them and mocks them and like kind of, basically teases them. My one criticism of this movie is like when I was in that group, I was in the social outcasts, I was in that. We teased each other. Like there's a part in the movie where they talk about like they gave each other a hard time. Ash's character, played by Lachlan Watson, talks about how that character kind of gave them a hard time at one point. We all kind of gave each other shit, but we did not mistreat other people unless it was like the popular football players because we didn't like them. We were never cruel for the sake of being cruel. Like that was never us. Now I can't say that's universal, of course. I wouldn't say that's like I'm going to paint a wide blanket, but because the metal kids, the skate or whatever, we were already kind of the outcast. So we just didn't mistreat other people for the sake of being mean. So like when that happened, I was kind of like, I think they would almost befriend these kind of dorky kids because, like, they're the ones like we want you to hang out because you're also outcast. So that was one thing. Like, there was some hardcore bullying going on in that moment. I was like, we would have never bullied the kids who were just not part of our group for the sake of bullying them. Like, these kids weren't bothering them. They weren't making fun of them. They weren't trying to start trouble. And I was just like, we wouldn't have done that. We wouldn't have just mocked and bullied these kids for no reason.
It almost more reflected something like, when you think about the first Nightmare on Elm Street, like what was it, Rod? Like Rod was just the shithead of the group. So it does track for like every movie has a complete shithead bully. In this instance, it's happened to be in one of the outcast groups. Now, like I rolled with a crew, and like there was a couple of guys who were just out of high school that also rolled with us. I'm sure they were big winners. They would be shitheads to people. They weren't necessarily like in the crew. They were just crew adjacent, and they'd be shitty to people. And eventually, like, we just didn't hang out with those guys. Like, eventually they just kind of folded out. It was weird to see one like in charge, but that guy ends up getting a great payoff in the movie anyway. Like, it's just something that totally worked out. But I know what you mean. And there's one other detail, and I don't know if this will resonate with you, but it resonates huge with me. So Kyle Mooney's also from San Diego. Now he's from North County, which might as well just be like you're from Columbus and a guy's from Memphis, Tennessee. Like it might as well be different places. Like, but North County is indeed part of San Diego. Another thing that is fucking hilarious about this movie is the hippie culture in the 90s. Now, I don't know about you, Damon, but like in the 90s, there was a full-blown hippie revival. Like, if you were a hippie of the 1970s who had long iron straight hair and bell-bottoms and shit, like, it was a thing. It was a thing to look like a hippie from the Woodstock era. There are so many hippies and granola fucking grungy crust hippies in this movie, and I knew those guys too, because they were on the periphery of the hip-hop scene. So, like, when they'd go and, like, hang out with those crusty hippies that were loving to fucking smoke on their bongs and play hacky sack and shit like that was also such a fucking huge thing. And it was a big thing in San Diego. Like everybody in San Diego loves Sublime because they're like a big stoner band, and like they're a stoner hippie band. I couldn't stand it. But like there are still guys that walk around. We have a part of town called Ocean Beach, which is basically the cruddiest, shittiest beach in town. And that's where all the hippies still hang out, and everybody's still blasting Sublime if you go down the main boulevard and listen to all the bars. Like, it's funny that they captured that little element too, because that was a big part of the 90s, that whole hippie revival shit. And it just had me fucking rolling.
So yes, we definitely had that. I remember when pot became like a thing at my school, like everyone was doing. I remember when I smoked pot for the first time, and it was just like, I almost felt like wrong. It's like, oh, I'm doing something bad right here, but everyone was doing it, so of course you had to do it. That was long before I tried other things and went way down a different path at one point in high school and college. But no, we definitely had that culture, and it was definitely big. Like everyone wearing corduroys and sandals and tie-dye shirts. And yeah, and that was also what's funny is Kyle Mooney, who, again, I know Kyle Mooney was in Saturday Night Live for like a decade. I don't really watch Saturday Night Live. I watch clips from Saturday Night Live, like when they did the Beavis and Butthead skit from this year, the one with Ryan Gosling that got so huge. I saw that cracked up, but I don't generally watch Saturday Night Live. When I watched Saturday Night Live was in the 90s when it was Adam Sandler and Chris Farley and Kevin Neal and all. Like, that's when I was a Saturday Night Live viewer when I was a kid. I have not watched a full episode of Saturday Night Live probably in like 20 years. So I was not aware who Kyle Mooney was, and I realized doing research for this film, he was in that show for like a decade, and he just left recently to kind of do his own thing. He's in this movie playing the hippie character, and the lead hippie character has like dreads. And I remember when I first started meeting the white kids with dreads, and like it was a thing, like it was part of the culture. It was so funny. So yeah, this movie, it really did get like drilled down perfectly in terms of like the characters and the representation. And the thing I really do love about it, while again it's a movie, so everyone's a little, it's almost like you take a character and you kind of inject it with steroids and it kind of blows up a little bit bigger than it should be. Everyone's a little over.
Dude,
over.
Some of them were not that far off, dude. That was the funny fucking thing.
That's what I was gonna say. Like, even though some of them are a little bit like overtly like outside the box of what that character is, kind of like my complaint about the bullying of the outcast kids. How right they got so many of these characters is eerie. It is eerie, like how right they got some of these characters, because again, this felt like there were moments where I turned to my girlfriend, I was like, did they just shoot this in my high school? Like, what? When did they film this? Because it felt so authentic.
I'm not kidding when I say this movie does not exaggerate. Like, I knew Garrett is the name of Kyle Mooney's character, and he works at the video store, and basically he just is looking for any reason to go to the back room and smoke some weed.
And you can tell Garrett is the kid you're talking about, who is like 21, hanging out with like the 17-year-old kids.
100%. And I think Kyle Mooney's about 40 years old, but he's playing like a 22-year-old who's hanging out with high school kids. They come into the video store, and he's just like, should we go to the champagne room? And it's like, this is literally, I would go visit dudes who worked at video stores, and we'd all go into the back room and they would smoke out. I didn't smoke weed in high school, but they did. And it was just like, that was the whole fucking thing. I knew guys exactly like this. So I'm encouraging people to go. It's like, if you really aren't familiar with that time period, and then we have audience members who are older than us too, and be like, I have no fucking clue what that was like. And the people that are younger, I'm telling you, there have been so many parody movies that parody and make fun of and are goofy about this shit. This walks right up to the line, but it rarely crosses it. Like, it's literally as accurate a movie as I have ever seen to depict this particular era, because I lived it. And there was every character that walked in that room, I was like, I knew that guy. Like, I was a social butterfly. So even though I was like a hip hop head, I knew all the different cliques. And it was like, no, none of these people were so ridiculously exaggerated that they didn't come off as genuine. And yet it was hilarious, laugh out loud, funny. I mean, I can't recommend this movie enough. I really want this movie to do well just for my own nostalgia's sake. But man, I think they fucking nailed it.
Two things I want to say real quick. I want to say, one, my own personal experience. I was talking about the hippie thing. I kind of forgot I want to tell this story real quick. So when I went to college, I was from a very, very small town in Ohio. When I went to college, I went to the University of Cincinnati, which to me was like going from like, Little House on the Prairie to like, fucking New York City. So I never lived in a city before. So I moved in the dorms, and I was experiencing that culture for the first time. And when I moved in my dorm my first year, I lived by myself, and my next door neighbor, who was also by himself, his name was Eric. I remember his name to this day. And he was the prototypical stoner kid. Corduroy pants, tie-dye shirts, and I can't remember what major he was, but he had on like Monday, our classes at Cincinnati went Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Tuesday and Thursday. So yeah, some classes Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the other classes were Tuesday, Thursday. On Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, he had an 8 a.m. class. And my first class, I want to say, was like 9 or 10. So it was like an hour and a half behind him. Every morning at fucking 7 a.m., he would crank up Grateful Dead. And without fail, it was his way to wake up. He played that driving that train high on cocaine.
Oh,
Casey
God.
Joe. Every morning, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for the first quarter of school, and I would wake up to that fucking song every morning, and it drove me absolutely insane. I would tell him, and he would laugh, because it wasn't like he was cranking it up, but the dorm rooms the walls were so thin. Our closets were like back to back to each other, like his room and my room. And so it would just always reverberate in my room. So I kept telling him, like, dude, you got to stop listening in the morning. You're driving me insane. He just never, he was never like combative or rude about it.
Sure.
He was just like, oh yeah, I'm not turning up that loud. It's just the way I wake. I'm like, all right. I was like, I'm going to get you back. And so I went away for a weekend to go home or something. I can't remember what weekend. I knew he was staying and I knew his girl was coming to see him. So I took my boombox, another mechanism of the 90s, took my boombox, stuck it in my closet, turned on Vanilla Ice, Ice Ice Baby, cranked it up, and hit it on repeat, and left. So for 3 days straight, Ice Ice Baby played on repeat. And when I came home, my key hit my door, and as I turned the lock, he opened the door, and his eyes were wide, and he's like, Ice Ice Baby? Really? And I was like, I told you I'm over the fucking Grateful Dead, dude. You got to turn it down. He's like, my girlfriend left because she couldn't take it anymore. The song was playing on repeat for 3 days straight. And I was like, I told you I was going to get you back. And guess what? Never heard Grateful Dead again in the morning. So that was my own personal story of dealing with the hippie next door. Also, that was a personal story I had to tell. The other thing I wanted to say about this is we've had a couple of, like, when we do reviews on this show, generally speaking, we try to pick movies that are going into the theater or theater that are, movies that are getting some buzz, some attention. Because, again, let's be honest, those are the ones people want to hear about. We're going to do Nosferatu in a couple weeks since we have a massively huge movie to end the year. We did a movie earlier this year called Strange Darling, which was not a big theatrical release. I don't know even how much money it made at the box office, but we praised that movie up, left, right, and center and said, you need to see this movie. Seek it out. It's brilliant. It's great. Go watch it. Willa Fitzgerald deserves an Oscar nomination. That was me banging the drum for her earlier this year. I think Y2K is the latest movie that I know is not going to make $1 billion at the box office. It's not going to open number one. But if I could tell people to seek out a movie, this would be the one. This is the first one since Strange Darling where I'm like, I know not enough people are going to see this, and you should. It is, and again, it's my brand of horror comedy where it's not the parody and it's not the so bad it's good. Those are the two things I hate the most in horror comedies. The parody, which you mentioned, Scary Movie, I despise those movies. And the it's so bad it's good. The people who love Evil Dead because it's so corny and cheesy and graphics are great. They love, oh, this is so funny. I don't like those movies. You know that. I don't like those movies.
Yeah.
Give me Shaun of the Dead. Give me Zombieland. Give me Y2K movies that are trying to be funny, but injecting some horror into it. This is that. So I know it's not going to be number one. I know it's not going to be the biggest box office draw, but I'm telling you, if you're like, Y2K, there are people I said this to, friends who I was like, I saw Y2K, like, what's that? They hadn't heard of it. And I was like, go see it. Trust me. So if you're listening to this right now and you haven't seen Y2K, you haven't even heard of Y2K, run, don't walk to the theater and see this movie.
Yeah, a couple of people that I invited to go see it, they were like, nah, I think I'm going to pass. I know they would have loved this movie. They would have absolutely loved it. Like, if you thought week one, like, Y2K, I'll wait till it comes to streaming. Go fucking see it right now. It's so funny at this time of year. Like it's kind of only big prestige movies and award movies that are really coming out because they want to get their nominations for the Oscars and stuff like that. And so unless you want to go see Wicked or Gladiator 2, knock yourself out if you want to. But if you want something funny and different, it's Y2K.
Absolutely. So with that being said, Patrick, let's get into categories, which means we're going to get into spoilers. So if you haven't seen Y2K, if you can't tell, Patrick and I loved this movie. Full stop. Like, I have a hard time believing this is probably not going to end up somewhere in our best of list at the end of the year. It was so much fun. So go see it, check it out, and if you haven't seen it, come back and listen to the rest of the episode. Or again, if you just don't care, we are now getting into full spoiler territory. So do you want to talk about the full plot and basically kind of talk about the movie, or do you want to get right into categories?
I mean, the movie is really simple. It really is just like the what you see in the trailer is what you get. It turns to maximum overdrive. These robots, or the electronics. This is the cool little side thing that Y2K does, but you kind of already see it in the trailer. So this isn't even really a spoiler. But the electronics build themselves out into these sentient little robots. They never show you how. You don't need to fucking worry about it. That's not this movie. This movie is getting to the point, much like we talked about werewolves last week. Don't worry about how it works. all you know is that you're in one room, and then from the other room comes a fucking Max Headroom looking robot ready to fucking kill you. Like, just understand that that's how it works. And this group of kids, Eli and Laura and Danny, CJ and Ash, they run from this party where all hell broke loose when Y2K created these digital monsters that are now the plan of these digital monsters is to basically do the Matrix. They want to farm humans for a battery source so they can continue to take over the world, and that's about it. It's really that simple. They don't overcomplicate any of it. You're just there for the laughs and the fun and the chase of it all. And then, at the end of the day, they solve the problem. It's a very simple movie. A lot of people die in the process, by the way, and they die either hilariously or tragically. But this is not an overcomplicated movie at all.
Can I mention one plot point before we get to categories that I want to applaud this movie for? And I saw Kyle Mooney talked about this in a couple of interviews, and I read it, and I was like, I love this. So early on, you meet Eli and Danny. They are, again, very much similar. As I said, this is, Danny is played by a kid from New Zealand, legitimately a kid from New Zealand. I said he's New Zealand Jonah Hill because he's like the funny best friend guy, and then you have kind of like the dorky, the other friend, which is Eli in this movie, which was Evan in Superbad. They were the best of friends, and they were, like I said, they were each other's only friends. They go to this party, and Eli is desperate to hook up with Laura. She's the super popular girl, but she's also a bit of a brainiac, quietly a bit of a brainiac. They're friends from Spanish class, and they get together on AOL Instant Messenger, another mechanism of the fucking late 90s, early 2000s. They get on and they talk, and they kind of flirt a little bit on there, but he's never been brave enough to actually ask her out because she actually is like the super pretty, popular girl. But he knows her as like she's actually a bit of a hacker. She's a bit of a computer geek. But she never really kind of shows that side of herself at school, only kind of like to him in these chat rooms. So he really wants to. Now she no longer is with her older boyfriend. They broke up, and he's just like, I want to be with her. And so Danny is like trying to hype his friend up to go talk to Laura at this party. Then when mayhem breaks out, people start dying in some really funny and creative ways. A lighter with a hairspray bottle, which we've all heard that trick about lighting fire so it gets lit on fire. There's some really fun moments in like this mayhem that breaks out at this house party, which, by the way, the lead character, Soccer Chris, is played by the Kid Leroy, who's a rapper. I'm sorry, I'm so out of touch. I didn't know who the Kid Leroy was, but he's in this movie playing a soccer kid. And by the way, again, perfect jock asshole. We all dealt with those in high school. My God, did that kid nail it. But the thing I want to bring up, the plot point I want to bring up real quick is that, so everyone's running to the garage. They're like arming up and like, we got to get out of here. We got to get away from the machines. And then out of nowhere, Danny dies.
Yeah.
Danny dies like 30 minutes into the movie. Now, in any other movie, any other buddy comedy or teen coming-of-age comedy, those two would have been together till the very end. And if one of them died, it would have been in the very final sequence. Like, tragically, oh my God, one of them didn't make it. I saw Kyle Mooney say that when we decided to kill off Danny early in the movie, we wanted to jolt the audience. We wanted them to not see this coming because everyone expected them to survive. And I absolutely loved that. Not because I didn't like the Danny character. Danny character was great, but that's the point. You don't see it coming. When he dies, like even in the theater, I was like, what? Like he's got to make it, right? Because you're just so used to that character being like the comic relief throughout the entire movie. He dies 30 minutes into the movie. The best friend, the Seth from Superbad, dies 30 minutes into the movie. You're like, oh shit! And I absolutely loved that they twisted it and dumped me on my head because I 1000% didn't see that coming.
It's the key to every great movie is the subversion of expectations. It really is. And that was a big one. That was a huge one. This was just getting started. The shit was just popping off. And you're like, great, okay, Danny and Eli, they're gonna go on this adventure together and figure this out. And it's like, no. Danny's gonna get taken out, and Eli's gonna have to figure out how to do all this without his boisterous, fun, gregarious, life of the party friend. Like that friend was the guy that was he was the ultimate wingman. He was helping him out by being the big life of the party. He's out there, he's mixing it up with everybody. Everybody seems to kind of love him. and he loses him in the hardest possible moment when it's like, oh, now we don't know what to do at all, and I don't have my best friend. I'm actually with a group of essentially strangers, right? And this chick Lauren that I have a big crush on, and I barely have ever talked to in real life, only on AOL Instant Messenger, and like a bunch of other kids who don't even like or know me. So it puts Eli in a whole brand new situation that you don't typically see your protagonist in. I love that. I absolutely love that. And you have to do something like that. You have to put put the audience on their head, because otherwise you kind of know how it's all going to unfold. And so for the rest of the movie, Eli is trying to find the strength just to move on. And there's so many moments where he was just like, dude, this is literally the worst day of my life. Like, not just because the world is ending, but I lost my best friend. Like, I watched my best friend die, and I'm trying to get along with like people I've never even like hung out with before, and I'm an awkward kid who's never come out of his shell. Like, this is just a nightmare scenario for a kid like this, and he has to find the strength throughout the movie to become the hero, or at least part of the hero team. So that's a great subversion of expectations that you're not going to get anywhere else.
And they build it up so perfectly, because when you meet them, they're both kind of outcasts. But when they get to this party, Danny kind of comes out of his shell. He does a performance of the Thong Song by Cisco. Everyone's like, he gets to kiss a girl. Like, everyone's like, the whole thing is them getting to kiss. He gets to kiss a girl, and then he actually tells a story about a sleepover where he actually peed in Eli's drink, and like, Eli's embarrassed, and like later in the movie, they're like, "Who is this kid?" And somebody yells out, "It's piss breath!" Like, they make Danny become like beloved by everybody, and Eli's still like, "What the fuck?" Like, I'm still on the outside looking in, but you love Danny. They've built it up to where you love Danny, and then for them to kill him 30 minutes into the movie, and I mean, legitimately, he didn't come back, and there is a post-credit sequence of him performing the Thong Song again, which is pretty hilarious, but he's gone. And so that, as you said, just the perfect subversion of expectations, because as I said, even in that moment, I was like, oh, what? Like, huh? He's got to be okay, right? Like, because you don't expect them to kill that. Like I said, that would be like watching Superbad, and the scene where, remember the scene where Seth gets hit by the car when they're standing there talking about buying condoms, and the guy backs into Seth? Like, imagine the guy literally rolled over and killed Seth. You're like, what the fuck? Like,
be a totally different movie.
Yeah, but that's how shocking it was. I was like, hold on, he can't be. He's dead. Like, really?
Yeah, he's the sidekick. You can't kill the lovable sidekick, and just like, no, you kill him right away. Right away, and then let the kid figure it out on his own. It's a great subversion of expectations.
That might be, I know it sounds terrible to say this, that like might be my favorite story point in this entire film, because so much of it does.
No, you're right.
So many other parts of this movie really does fall into like a little bit of the connect the dots, like the geeky kid going for the super popular girl, and you know the unlikely people getting cast together to survive. We've seen that. I'm not saying it's bad. I love this movie, but I'm saying like we've seen that version. But that one thing, when I got home, that's the one thing that stuck with me. I was like, holy shit, he really subverted my expectations. I did not see that coming. And even when it happened, I was like, what? Like, no, Danny can't be dead. It was like, honestly, like that was to me one of the most brilliantly written plot twists in a horror comedy film that I've seen in a while. I'm not kidding when I say like 30 minutes in to get rid of one of your main two characters, utterly brilliant.
Loved it.
So let's now get into categories. Of course, we're going to kick things off as we always do with our first category, which is
Prime Time Bitch.
Our Welcome to Primetime Bitch Best Performance. So Patrick, when it comes to Y2K, who gets your best performance?
My best performance goes to Lachlan Watson, who played Ash. Now, I don't know Lachlan Watson from anything else, but if you watch The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, they were on that show as well. The character of Ash, it's funny because I was like, it's not that I had trouble coming up with a best performance, but it's just not one of those movies. Like it's an ensemble movie. Everybody's kind of like playing their part. They're all integral to like solving the problem. So each person takes their little moment. But Ash, who is really just a side character, who she walks around with this little handy cam. I had a handy cam in 1999, and that's actually how I got into video, because my rap crew, I was just the guy going around filming, and my friend's brother would actually edit our stuff together. So I really actually related to Ash in that respect. But Ash has this moment later on in the film where Fred Durst is now part of the crew, which I think you see a little bit of that in the trailer. And she gives Ash gives Fred Durst this rah-rah speech, like, get the fuck up. You changed my life. Your music changed my life. And I can't sit here in the apocalypse and see Fred Durst wither into a pile of shit. Like, you changed me. You brought me out of my shell, made me who I am. And in that moment, I was like, this is like weirdly poignant. Like, and this movie has a lot of moments like that in a funny, goofy movie where she's just talking about Limp Bizkit, which I personally never like Limp Bizkit's music. But when she's talking about it with that level of passion, the character of Ash, I was like, damn, this is poignant. And so I picked Ash out specifically and Lachlan, their performance, because it was truly heartfelt. In that moment, even though I was like, I despise Limp Bizkit, and that music, in my opinion, ruined rock and roll. I was just like, this is very inspiring, very poignant, and it took great acting to do that. And Lachlan Watson achieved that.
So I actually did watch The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, so I was familiar with Lachlan Watson, and I do like their performance very much in both that show and this movie. I was Ash. I was never the leader of my group. I was never the loudest, most outspoken person. I was always kind of like the Robin to everyone else's Batman, and that's very much what Ash is in this movie. So, like, that's the character that spoke to me the most, and Lachlan Watson did an incredible job, and their performance was outstanding. And again, because I had seen them in, they also did the Chucky TV series that was just recently canceled, but it was very beloved by horror fans. They were also in that show as well. But I loved The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina for about 3 of the 4 seasons. The 4th season was really bad. But anyways, yeah, I loved that performance as well. And that's the character I was most like, oh my God, I am this character. That was me. Like, I was there. And again, there's actually one part during the movie where Ash, they're filming with the camera, and at one point somebody takes the camera and turns it on. They're like, no, I don't go on camera. That was me. Like, even starting to do video, me starting to do video interviews for my job, like what I do, and now we do this podcast on video. Like, even then, like when I used to do videos in person, when I would go to shows, I would always be behind the camera. I never wanted to be the guy with the microphone on camera. Like, so, like, what did you think? No, hate being on camera. I still to this day get like a little anxiety being on camera. So when Ash said that, like, no, I'm not on camera, I was like, oh my God, this is me. So, as you said, this isn't necessarily like a big performance piece. That's not to say people aren't good in this movie, but my best performance I gave actually to Kyle Mooney as Garrett. Now, one of the reasons I gave this best performance was because I wasn't familiar with Kyle Mooney. I went into this movie as clueless as you possibly could, because when I saw the one trailer in the theater, and I saw it maybe twice in the theater, I knew the lead character, Jaden Martell, because he was in It. I knew him from It, Chapter 1. I knew that's how I knew Jaden Martell. I knew the name Rachel Zegler because everyone lost their mind about her being cast as Snow White, which is the dumbest shit ever. But I know she's in like the new Snow White movie, like the live action Snow White movie. So I knew who she was, never seen her in anything before. Honestly, the 2 people in this movie I was most familiar with, well, besides like Alicia Silverstone, she's very much like a very, very side character, was Lachlan Watson, because I had seen them in Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, and Eduardo Franco because he was in Stranger Things. So my point is, I didn't know who Kyle Mooney was. I don't watch Saturday Night Live. I had no idea Kyle Mooney was also in the movie, and he wrote and directed this. I had no knowledge of that going into this. But that hippie character that he plays, Garrett, was so perfect and hilarious, and I knew guys like that. Like, I absolutely knew guys like that, 110%. And by the way, he's the one character, if you're not from that era, you're going to be like, he's kind of what you're describing as like the overtly, like, almost like amplified version of himself. I promise you, he's really not. He's really not. He's like
exaggerated about that character.
He's like, hey guys, you want to go to the champagne room? And he's like, spark it up. He's like, oh, this is great. Like, he's very dorky and like hippie. I promise you, I know guys like that. So I thought his performance was spot on. And he actually had one of the best moments of the movie, which I don't want to spoil some of our later categories, but he has a great moment where he mans up with, what are those stick things called? They had the two balls on
they're
the
like
end, you had the
balance.
2
They're like balance sticks or something. It was a very 90s thing, and it's probably still going on at Burning Man, another big hippie commune.
Throughout the movie, he's trying to learn how to do this, and at one point he mans up with those sticks and goes to battle a robot. Just so fucking hilarious. And just he's great. So I thought Kyle Mooney just stole the show.
That rolls perfectly into my MVP, which is Kyle Mooney. I almost gave him best performance because that character, and Damon is 100% right. If you're not familiar with the 90s revival hippies, there's no exaggeration in that character. I mean, none. I mean, that there are other characters that are far more exaggerated than that character. I knew guys like that. The only thing that might have been like oh, this isn't realistic is that he was wearing shoes more than the hippies I knew, you know. But even then, when they cut to his shoes, they were like the slip-on Birkenstocks, which were like 100% like the cork bottom Birkenstock. Like it was to a T. But that's not why I'm giving him MVP. I'm giving him MVP for his writing and his directing. He put detail into this movie. And he had to do it with his team, obviously. You know, obviously a lot of credit goes to your production designers and your costumers, the people who actually can make this stuff come to life. But Kyle Mooney's detail-oriented style of directing really brought me back to something. Like really, really brought me back. There are so many details in this movie that are perfect, that are absolutely perfect. You could get them wrong. You can exaggerate. Or you can just get them so right that people are like, oh my God, like that's literally my childhood. Like, how did you know that? And I had to give him credit for that because he could have glossed over that stuff in the process of writing and directing this movie. And he was like, no, every single bit of it has to be perfect. And it was.
What I loved, I saw an interview you talked about when him and Evan Winter were writing this movie. They knew they had to pack this full of 90s references. Like they knew that was going to be part of it. So the way they decided on which references actually got in the movie was they went back and forth and they mentioned things to each other. And if both of them knew the reference really well, like what they were talking about, why it was so, you know, pop culture, why it was so of that era, they would put it in the movie. But if one of them was like, I don't really remember that, they wouldn't do it because they're like, we only want to put things in that people are going to recognize. We don't want these obscure, weird references that people are going to watch this movie and be like, what? Like, what does that mean? So that I love that attention to detail. Like, even the references, the 90s references in this movie, they're like, we're not going to put it in unless it's something the entire general audience will remember or have some memory of. And I absolutely love that attention to detail. And they really did. Like I said, they drilled this movie. Again, like this was a snapshot of my youth. It was eerie.
It's incredible.
I am so happy you gave this MVP to Kyle Mooney because, you know, typically when we do MVP, I'm the guy who does writer, director, mostly writer because I'm the writer. I love the writing. But I'm so happy you went this direction because it gives me the honor and pleasure of giving my MVP to none other than Mr. Fred Durst.
Go off, Damon.
Fred Durst, here's my proclamation, my proclamation about this movie, Patrick. Fred Durst is the greatest celebrity cameo in a film since Bill Murray appeared in Zombieland. His appearance comes towards the latter half of the movie, towards the latter like third of the movie, and they go back to the video store, and this guy comes out in like a hooded sweatshirt, and he's like, yeah, man, it's getting crazy out there. It's so dark and it's hard to survive. And they're like, who is this guy? And he takes off the hood and it's fucking like really Fred Durst. I fucking rolled. I was like, oh my God. Because I didn't know any of this. Now, when you look at the marketing materials and you look at interviews and like, no one's hiding the fact that Fred Durst is in this movie. But I had no idea. So for me, I was like, holy shit, they got Fred Durst. Now, couple things. One, The interviews I've read with Kyle Mooney and Evan Winter said that they wrote this movie and they wrote it for Fred Durst, but they had no idea if they were actually going to get him or not. So when they got closer to, they pitched it and it got accepted, and A24 was into it. They're like, well, now we got to find out, like, is Fred Durst going to do this? Because if not, we got to totally rewrite this movie. So they went to Fred Durst, they gave him the script, and they had like 2 meetings with him, and he agreed to do the movie. And they're like, okay, we're good now because we have, like, that was the key element. They had written an entire, like, third of the movie around Fred Durst. Now, to his credit, he does a really good job of acting. Like, he's not bad at all. Like, he's actually really good. But when you think about the linchpin of an era, like, I would say the 80s, you could probably point directly at, like, a Michael Jackson or a Madonna. They were, like, the most iconic figures of that era. The early 90s, it was Kurt Cobain, without a doubt. Kurt Cobain was the symbol of the grunge era. But when you talk about the late 90s going into the early 2000s, yes, Jonathan Davis from Korn was the dreadlocked metal guy.
He'd have something to say about it, yeah.
But Fred Durst was the perfect symbol of that era. The red backwards Yankees hat, the baggy jeans, the big bubble coat. It was the perfect cameo. And when he popped out and took off the hood, it was actually Fred Durst. I was like, holy shit. And then the entire movie just shifts because from then on out, like, they're playing Limp Bizkit songs. And he actually does an acoustic performance of Faith, which was the song that made Limp Bizkit big, the cover they did of George Michael's Faith. I loved it. And his arrival and actually playing, like, a major part in the movie again, there's so much I like about Y2K, but that attention to detail to actually get fucking Fred Durst, and unlike Bill Murray in Zombieland, where he's in it for, 5 minutes maybe, like real quick.
He's got a good 10 minutes in there, yeah.
Whatever. It's a very it's more of a cameo.
It's not integral to the plot, yeah, totally.
Yeah. This is actually integral to the plot. Like, Fred Durst plays a major part in the rest of this movie, the last third of the movie. I fucking loved it, dude. It was so perfectly 90s. Like, it was like, oh my God, this was the perfect guy. You could not have picked a better person.
Damon, this once again puts my feet in the sand, cemented. Fucking trailers give away too much shit. I knew Fred Durst was in this movie because he's in the fucking trailer. Like, I don't know which trailer, maybe which one you saw ahead of time. I saw the one that had Fred Durst in it. Why would you do that? Now, I know that the answer for the studio is simple. If I put Fred Durst in my trailer, people will go see it because it's Fred Durst. Cool. But man, the payoff that you got, not knowing it was Fred Durst, is the payoff I would have got that I would have loved to have had. And I just watched the one trailer. That's it. And I fucking 86th. I didn't want to see a damn thing else. So as much as I love what they did with Fred Durst's character, I was bummed because I knew who it was when, like, this figure is in the shadows with the grumbling voice saying, "I saw it all go down, man. I saw it." And then when he appears in the light and it's Fred Durst, it's a payoff like no other payoff. It's fucking hilarious. And then he becomes a super important part of the movie, which is when they finally go to the high school and where all these robots are herding people to convert them into batteries. Fred Durst kind of plays like a distraction or whatever that is, whatever you would call that. And he gets up on the stage and he thinks he's going to, like, rouse the crowd up because it's like, hey, it's me, Fred Durst. Everybody get excited. But they're all boomers. All these parents are boomers. They don't know who Fred Durst is, and they don't give a fuck who he is. And they're like, who are you? Who gives a shit? Who's Fred Durst? Which is part of the comedy, the subversion, right? You think, oh, wow, if this was the 1980s and we got, like, Boy George or somebody to do a cameo and he showed up, everybody be excited because it's Boy George or whatever. And it's like, no, he showed up and didn't excite dick. Nobody gave a fuck that Fred Durst was there. And the brilliance of it, and the brilliance of Kyle Mooney and Evan Winter writing that in there was, like, he had a song for boomers. He was like, oh, wait, if I sing Faith, they know that song because they're all boomers and they loved that song when they were in their 20s. I'll sing my cover of Faith and that'll bring them all around and distract them and keep them here. And that it was such a clever device to put in the movie. It's like you really couldn't have made the movie with another character from the 90s other than Fred Durst. It actually worked because he had this cover song that would actually make the boomer parents sit up and listen to him. And it was like, man, that's a fucking, it's just, it goes right back to my MVP of Kyle Mooney. Like, for them to go, that's how we make Fred Durst work in this movie, not just as a corny cameo, but as someone who's integral to the movie, which I guarantee you is why he said yes to this movie. They said, you're not just a walk-on cameo. You matter to how the movie gets finished and how it gets fixed. I know you probably know this about Fred Durst, but he fancies himself a filmmaker. He actually said publicly, Limp Bizkit got in the way of my dreams of becoming the next Martin Scorsese. Now, okay, calm down, Fred. Like, you became a hit, like, rap rocker. Like, just, you got something good. Don't shit on your success because you wanted to be a great filmmaker. I mean, you can make films too and not mention that shit. But, like, I guarantee you he wasn't going to say yes to this if they were like, yeah, it's a fucking walk-on and we make fun of you and it'll be funny because, we're making fun of the 90s. And he would have been like, I'm good. Rewrite it with somebody else. They said, you are so important to this movie that we would have to rewrite the last act of the movie and it would not work without Fred Durst. So be our hero. And he came in and he did it.
And also, to that point, like, they said, like, they were doing it, like, they weren't trying to mock him or mock Limp Bizkit or mock the character, like he actually was a serious character. But he also, there are moments where he kind of jokes about himself and jokes about, and he said he was into it. He was into making those jokes. He was into having fun with it. So, like, they were like very, like, we're not trying to make fun of you or mock your band or mock who you were. Like, you were just you were literally the perfect representation of that 1999 era. We need you in the movie. And he did it, but he also did have some fun with it. Like, he had a little bit when he talked about Wes Borland, the bass player, and, like, just some funny stuff. Like, it was just, again, it was just like it was the perfect character. And again, could they have done it with somebody else? Sure, they could have. But would it have been as good? I don't think so.
It was perfectly impactful and 100% on brand with 1999. Like 100%.
Yeah. Next category, let's talk about best laugh. This is a really, really fucking funny movie. Like, it is. I'm trying to think, like, what, like, I laughed a lot. Like, Anora was actually, like, a really funny movie. Have you seen Anora yet?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Great. Great movie and very, very funny.
Anora is actually a really funny movie. But it's hard to find a good comedy. Like, it is hard to find a good comedy. There's, I've seen some movies that are like, oh, this is funny. I'm like, yeah, it wasn't that funny. Y2K nails it. So we could say, like, 19 different moments of best laugh. But Patrick, for you, what was the best laugh in Y2K?
It was very hard to pick one, so I picked two. And I'm curious if one of them is, like, similar to one you were going to pick.
I picked two also. I couldn't pick one either. I picked two as well.
It was super hard to pick. And honestly, at one point in my list of best laughs, because I'm listing them while I'm watching the movie, one time I just put Kyle Mooney. I was like, just because every time he was on screen, I laughed my ass off. It was just super funny. But one of them is a Kyle Mooney moment very specifically, which is they have this one. There's this one plot device where a computer it's Eli's old computer, so he's actually kind of trying to befriend him, and that they're using that to, like, understand how things are actually happening. But Garrett, the crusty hippie, doesn't even really understand how computers work. So he just asks the computer because he thinks it's like AI and can answer everything. And he just goes, "Is it all good if you've never met your dad?" And I don't know what it was about the way he said it and the timing he said it and how he says it. It makes you fucking roll with laughter because it's just like, what? Why are you even bringing that up right now? It's like so fucking weird. And then my second one was, obviously throughout this movie, you're wondering if Eli and Laura, are going to, like, get together. You're like, are they going to get together? There's one point when they're escaping the manic robots that they all have to huddle in a porta potty, and this robot shoves them down the hill. And they end up in each other's arms, and then that song from what's his name comes on. Tell me, what's the name of the
Brian McKnight. Brian McKnight with the make a dream come true. Two fall in love with you. 3.
And it's such a romantic little moment. Song. Yeah, you could sing the whole song if you wanted to. It's like, it's first of all very, very of the time, of course. but they're looking at each other's eyes, and it's all going so well, except for the fact that they're in a porta potty, and literally all of the shit and piss and blue water starts running up and splashing them in the face. It's like so super fucked up while that Brian McKnight song is coming on, and then they crash at the bottom of the hill, and they're literally covered in shit. And then Eli gets out, and he's just like, "Fuck my fucking day! Is this the fucking worst day of my life?" I couldn't fucking handle it. It was, and there's just so many more funny moments, and those two, recalling them, I'm having trouble like getting through it. It was so fucking funny.
So the porta potty was, I mean, that was iconic. And actually in the theater, me and my girlfriend, when they started playing the Brian McKnight song, we turned to each other and we started doing the motion. We're like, one, you'll make a dream come true. Two, make me fall in love with. And we were doing it, and some guy behind us was cracking up. I don't know if he's cracking up at us or the movie, but we were dying. That was iconic. So I had two as well. Now, the porta potty scene would definitely qualify, but I'm going to cheat and go ahead and give two of my own because that would have absolutely been one of my two. But I have two also. One involves Garrett, actually in that same scene with the computer, because they're going through and the computer's like pulling from Eli's history. And at one point, it plays porn because he has porn on his computer. And Laura's trying to interface with the computer, and this porn pops up, and Eli goes, oh, it must be a virus. And Garrett goes, yeah, I got a lot of those viruses on my computer too. The line was just perfectly delivered when he's like, yeah, I got a lot of those viruses too. Died laughing. But the one, it was funny. And when I say the line, people are going to be like, that doesn't sound funny. But you have to watch the movie to understand, in the moment, I fucking died. So Ash is clearly the biggest Limp Bizkit fan. Like they're like wearing they're literally wearing the backwards New York New York Yankees hat like Fred Durst.
The bleach dyed hair.
They're wearing a Slipknot t-shirt, but they are 100% like a Limp Bizkit head. And so Ash is the one who kind of rah-rahs and gets Fred Durst back into it when he's kind of like downtrodden and be like, man, the world's over, my band's dead, and everyone, we got wiped out at a concert and blah blah blah. So they're on their way. So they decide they need to go to the high school to save humanity because they're all being herded in this high school to be transformed into batteries or be amalgamated into the robot collective. And they're sneaking in real quietly into the back entrance of the high school. And at one point you hear Ash go, so where do you find the inspiration for your songs? And Fred Durst just deadpan delivers the line of it. He goes, maybe we should talk about this later. And Ash is like, okay. And it's like the biggest throwaway line, but it's just so fucking funny in that moment. They're all sneaking in all quietly. You just hear Ash go, where do you find the inspiration for your songs? And Fred Durst goes, maybe we should talk about this later. I fucking died. I just burst out laughing and thought that was the funniest shit in the entire movie.
That's like classic Kyle Mooney, like awkward timing shit. Like, I really encourage you, if you're like Damon and you had no history of Kyle Mooney, don't even bother with his Saturday Night Live stuff. Just go look on YouTube for old Kyle Mooney like internet bits. Like, he used to do them all the fucking time. He's fucking hilarious. He's one of the funniest guys out there, and he's super subversive and weird. And just, it's little shit like that. And that's what this whole movie is. This whole movie is all these little funky moments that you gotta be there to experience, but they're so fucking funny.
But that was just just the timing of it. The world's coming to an end. They're trying to sneak into high school to save humanity. And it's like, where do you find the inspiration for your music? Maybe we should talk about this later. Maybe we should talk about this later when the world's not ending. It was just perfect timing. It just had me dying. So that was my other one. And that was the moment in the movie theater where I probably disturbed the other like 6 people in the theater because I just burst out cackling, laughing with that line.
Oh, I did that a lot. Yeah, just bursting out. Even I was like, some people in here are either too young or too old to understand this joke, and I'm the exact age to understand it and start howling.
Yeah. So Patrick, next category, let's talk about best kill, because this is a horror. There are definitely this is not like just a comedy. There are definitely horror elements. There's some gore. There's some crazy bloody parts. So Patrick, what was your favorite kill in Y2K?
My favorite kill was the drill kill. Now, there's robots of all different sizes. There's some that are like larger than life, and there's others that are like basically just little remote control. Sometimes it was just an appliance like a microwave or a blender. But I loved the drill kill because to me it was it was super intense. And I believe it was the character of Raleigh, which was Lauren's best friend. if I'm not mistaken. And she's like crawling on the floor at the party, and there's all this mayhem going on, and this little remote control with a drill hooked up to it. Never mind how it happened. That's not what we're here to figure out. There's a drill on it, and it just fucking drills right through her temple like a couple of times. And I was like, holy shit, like super fucking intense. And kind of funny because it's such a weird little, like this weird little toy, and it's like drilling into her brain. I just thought it was like, it was both funny, creative, and intense as a kill.
Yeah, it was definitely one of the like more surprising moments because it was actually like pretty like gnarly too. Like here's
Yeah,
like,
you're like, whoa.
You think it's gonna be one of the kind of like the Danny thing where you're kind of like, this is her best friend, and she just gets offed like right in that moment, and like and pretty gnarly how she gets offed. So mine, I referenced earlier. I'm gonna bring it up now. So in the moment when they're about to face off with the giant computer robot that is partially like Eli's computer and all these other computer parts and wires and everything, it's the big one. It's like the big boss. Garrett decides to man up, and he's like, we're going to take on this fucking robot. So he gets those sticks with the balls on the end that you balance. Again, I wish I knew what they were called, but that's what it is. And he takes it and he turns it like a Ninja Turtle. He's like, come on! And he charges at the fucking robot, and it has a weed whacker attached to one of its arm, and it just saws down Garrett's arm, and his arm falls off, and he's like, oh shit. And then it just lops his fucking head off, and his head goes rolling, and it rolls down to Eli, and you're like, oh shit. It was just so fucking funny because he has that like nut up moment because he's the hippie. Like the hippies aren't supposed to be the heroes of this moment. Like they're the ones they find are hiding out. They're hiding out at the old factory smoking weed and doing mushrooms and like just avoiding everything. And then he's like, I'm going to just be a hero. Go in there. He has these sticks. He has this moment where he's like, arr! And he runs at it. And you're like, it's going to be a battle. No, it's not going to be a battle. He gets his fucking arm chopped off and he's like, oh shit. And then his head gets lopped off. And you're just like, fuck. So Garrett getting killed was one of the most like brutal, but also hilarious moments of the movie.
Yeah, totally. There's quite a few of those, but those to me are the two highlights.
Yeah. Next category, Patrick, which is where we relate so much to this movie. Which clique were you? Now, we've already kind of talked about this, where we kind of fit in with this particular movie. But Patrick, you already mentioned you were a bit of the hip hop head, a little bit of the metal head. So which clique did you fit in when it comes to Y2K?
Well, there's something that like blew me away, and I think even in the theater, I out loud just went, "Oh shit!" There's a character who spends most of the movie with the crew. His name is CJ, played by Daniel Zogardi. CJ is wearing like a bucket hat, a baggy windbreaker, and baggy pants, and he's all about the underground conscious hip hop. It was fucking, they were literally ripping lines out of my brain from that age. Because at one point, I think it's, what's his name? Farkas, Eduardo Franco's character, who's kind of the bully. He's bullying him because he thinks he's a nerd. And he is kind of nerdy. He's a nerdy hip hop head, which is, I think, very on brand for what I was at the time. We were like the hip hop conscious nerds. People would come up to me at school and be like, oh, your boy Biggie Smalls got shot. And I'm like, dude, I don't listen to that mainstream hip hop shit. I'm all about freestyle fellowship. And the kid literally in the movie says freestyle fellowship. If you weren't listening to that kind of shit back in the day, you don't know who freestyle fellowship is. That's super fucking underground shit. That's a really, really deep cut. And this kid literally said it. And I was like, oh my God, how crazy it that this kid CJ references freestyle fellowship, which you had to fucking know. And I believe Kyle Mooney was a rapper in the 90s. So he clearly was also embedded in the same scene I was. I guarantee we were at some of the same shows growing up. I was like, holy shit, not only is he the hip hop nerd, but he also hangs out with the metalheads. Like he's kind of adjacent to them, which was 100% who I was. So I definitely rode that line that CJ rides in here, which is I would have known a Damon Martin, but I also would have been a rapper the entire time.
All right, so I got to know. You were a rapper? What was the name of your rap group and your rapper name? You had to have one.
Well, for sure, the rap name never changed. It's Rono Lewis, Lois, which actually spells Lois, but I always said Lewis. And the LOIS was for lost out in space or leaving out insignificant slang, because I didn't curse in my raps. And not for no other reason than my conscious hip hop. Like I couldn't waste it on curse words. Like I had to only drop knowledge. And I was in, and a shout out to all these crews. I was in Trey Deuce, 32 32 crew rhymomatic systematic destruction, spontaneous combustion of your eardrums. I was also in the Creatures. I was also in the Dirt Merchants. I was also in the Holy Trinity, which people thought were a Christian band, but we were not. It was just three dudes who loved rapping about hip hop shit. And shout out to the Earth Passengers. I was also in that crew as well. Like, so I was in all these different hip hop crews over the time.
So that's a lot, and that's awesome. Okay, when they were doing the whole like pan around the room, here's all the different clicks. When they stopped on Ash and Frank and Farkas and that group right there, and they played Korn, my girlfriend literally stopped and looked at me and goes, "That's you." I was like, yeah, it was.
Yeah, I knew it was you. I was like, looking at it going, there's Damon.
I was like, holy shit, that is me. Now, I did like hip hop, but I was definitely the band kid. I wanted to be in a band, and I could not play an instrument for shit, so I fancied myself a singer. Now, I'm not saying I was ever very good at it, but I fancied myself a singer. And so, to prove my point, I actually dug up, I had a composition notebook filled with lyrics. Now, I know I had like 10 different band names at different points. Now, were any of these real? A couple of them were. A lot of them were just living in my own head because I was always like, I'm going to start a new band. I had a friend in high school. We started a band, and then I went off to college, and I got involved in another band, and then I kind of went to another band, and then it just kind of fizzled away and stopped being a thing. But my most serious attempt was my senior year of high school, and my best friend who had just graduated high school, and we were all about starting a band. He played guitar and I sang, and we got close. We played a couple of shows, but we were into it. So I was all about it. So I can't remember, we had one first band name that for the life of me, I cannot remember what it was. But the one that I tried to get to stick, which, oh my God, it's so emo of the late 90s, Melting Suicide was the name of the band.
That's amazing.
Now, the other one, which was the one that we went with more frequently later on, was Hangman's Drove, which was a play on The Crow. If you remember The Crow, the band in that movie was the Hangman's Joke. I took that and I changed joke to drove, so we were Hangman's Drove. Now, if you don't believe me, I'm trying to hide the thing here.
For the YouTubers out there,
I don't really want people to see I don't really want people to see my address here, but you can see, if you can see it on camera right there, it actually says Damon Martin, Hangman's Drove.
Hangman's Drove. That's amazing.
This is my lyric notebook. Would you like to hear some of, now I'm not going to read the lyrics, but would you like to hear some of these masterpieces I wrote, the names of these songs?
I would love for you to sing these, Damon, right here, right now on this podcast.
We're not going to do that at all. Let's see. Separation Anxiety. That was one of my songs.
Yes.
Let's see. Preacher. That was another one of my songs. Let's see what else we got here. Kept Embrace. That feels very 90s.
Yes. Kept Embrace.
Angels Live in My Town. That was one of my songs. Welcome to My World. That's very
90s.
Yeah, let's see what else I got here. This Home, that was one of my songs.
Okay.
Let's see what else we got here. Simply Broken, that feels very, very 90s in that era. Twist of Fate, that was another one of my classics.
Twist of Fate.
Walk Away, that was another one of my classic songs. Let's see what else I got here. Okay, I got to end it on this. This is the perfect name for a 90s song. Tainted Smile.
Oh, Tainted Smile. That's so good.
Yeah.
So emo, so dark.
I actually have like 3 or 4 other lyric notebooks, but that was like my main one. So yes, everyone had the composition notebook of that era, and I definitely did. So yes, Hangman's Drove and Tainted Smile was our hit songs. Not really, but yes. So
I had so many notebooks full of lyrics because I was a writer. I rarely produced beats. In fact, my senior thesis, I guess, I don't know what you call it, senior project, was that I made a rap album. So I had to like fully produce it, all that stuff. I got some producers to put on it, and I did like 7 tracks or whatever, did photography, all that fucking shit. I loved it. I had so many lyric books. I don't think I have any now that I can think of. I don't think any of them exist, and I don't have one of our CDs. Nothing. Like all the music we made is lost to time. I have no idea where it is.
And actually, what's funny is there was one song I didn't have in my lyric book. This is one of my old ones. I do remember we did record a song at one point. We actually went to a recording studio, and the song was called Poor Boy. And I remember it because we made it. And actually, I wish I could. I don't have a cassette player anymore. I don't have a CD player anymore. I have a cassette of our demo, and it's Hangman's Drove Poor Boy demo. And I do have it. So if I could ever convert it, I might share it with you. I'm never going to share it with the audience because it's bad. It's real bad. But I do remember singing on that track, and it was called Poor Boy. I do remember that song. But there is a tape. There is a demo tape in my possession, but I have no cassette player, so I have no way to play it or listen to it at all. But I do know it exists, and it still is in the world.
That's amazing. Golly, I wish I had all the record of all the fucking rap shows we did and shit. We used to tour. It was so much fun.
Yeah, I have so many lyric books and like the song name Tainted Smile. That's like the perfect name right there. So
Tainted Smile.
Listen when you're listening to Hangman's Drove. That's the kind of hard shit you're gonna get.
I need my Hangman's Drove T-shirt.
Yeah, I wish. Patrick, next category: remake, sequel, or leave it alone. This is pretty self-explanatory, but this is where we take whatever movie we're reviewing and we say, should they remake it, should they sequelize it, or should they leave it alone? So when it comes to Y2K. Remake, sequel, or leave it alone. Let me preface this by saying at the end of the movie, they actually do jump 5 years in the future where we actually see these kids. At that point, they're now in college or about to finish college, and Eli and Laura are still together, and they're still very good friends with Ash. That's like the three main survivors of the movie because poor, what was it, CJ? Was that his name, the hip-hop kid?
CJ.
CJ gets killed by CDs to the head, which was really hilarious. Like, what a perfect way for a hip-hop guy to die. And Fred Durst survives as well, of course, but they're not like still hanging out with him years later, but fine. We do get a glimpse in the future, so it's a little harder maybe to do a sequel. But Patrick, if you were going to do this, remake, sequel, or leave it alone?
I'm going to cheat here, Damon, because I'm not going to comment on Y2K, but I am going to say remake for Kyle Mooney. Kyle Mooney has shown what he can do in the horror comedy space, and he needs more work. Like I think in terms of like I think he wants to keep doing the writing and directing. He also did a movie called Brigsby Bear, which I heard is amazing, and I've never seen it. He directed that as well, so he fancies himself a film director. He wants to do that. They have been talking for years now about remaking Chopping Mall. There's nobody on the planet right now, and I know our good friend Alex Noyer really wants to do a remake of Chopping Mall, but Alex, I know you've seen Y2K. You know Kyle Mooney can knock it out of the park. He understands the references from the time. He really knows how to build those worlds out. Give Kyle Mooney a mall and give him killer robots, and let's get that remake of Chopping Mall to Kyle Mooney. I think he's going to knock it out of the park. I think it's going to be great.
So I had my answer originally was leave it alone because much like the ending of Superbad, which I know I've referenced many times during this podcast, when that movie ends and Evan goes in one direction with a girl and Seth goes in the other direction with a girl and they're still best friends, but you can kind of tell they're now moving on with their lives where they're not necessarily attached to each other's hip, which was kind of the entire point of the movie because they were so reliant on each other that they needed to like kind of move on. Into the next phase of their life, which is college, or in this particular case, college, along with having girlfriends. I was like, don't touch it. Don't ever do it again.
Yeah.
Not that Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg ever planned on it, but they're like, don't ruin that. Superbad is like a perfect comedy. So my original answer was leave it alone because this is just a perfect horror comedy, and I know from experience what happens when you do sequelize a great horror comedy because Zombieland, I know Zombieland is not everyone's cup of tea, but I love Zombieland.
Yeah,
that might be
my
my
first
favorite
one's
horror,
great.
Might be my favorite horror comedy. The sequel was trash. And I mean utter trash. One of the worst sequels ever made. So that's why I'm like, don't fuck with it because Zombieland's perfect. Zombieland 2 was a garbage fire. So I'm like, you really can't sequelize it because they already gave us 5 years in the future in this movie. Like they show you like what happens 5 years in the future when they go back and visit Danny's grave and they're still friends and whatever. So you can't do that. So my original answer was leave it alone. But now I'm going to jump on board with you, Patrick, and say, what a fucking brilliant idea. Chopping Mall, as done by Kyle Mooney, which my love of Chopping Mall. It has the queen herself, Barbara Crampton, in the original.
And she'll be back. She's in the remake for sure.
Yeah. Give me that. I want that. I want to bathe in that right now. Like that is you just.
Feed it
Oh
to
my
me
god!
now.
You could remember a couple episodes ago when we were doing like the worst plot or the worst mechanism for a horror movie, and I came up with Jaws: The Revenge, and you said I can't even give my answer because that's the perfect answer, and fuck you for doing it. This is my version of that, and saying I can't answer this any better. Fuck you because you came up with the perfect answer. Shopping Mall remake. Oh, dude, bow down to the altar of Patrick Guerra for that one. That was brilliant.
You're welcome, Kyle, and I'll happily take an EP credit on that.
Great idea. Oh God, what a great idea. Let's talk about best 90s reference. Now, this movie is filled with 90s references. Like I said, there are moments where I was just like, did they literally take a snapshot of my teen years for this movie? Now, you made a list. Do you mind if I just kind of read off the list here of things that were in this movie?
Yeah, if you want to rifle through it, sure.
Okay, so AOL. We already mentioned some of these because they're just sort of huge thing. AOL, AIM, which is Instant Messenger, AOL Instant Messenger, Burn CDs, right. Fat Tongue Shoes, Herbal Essence, which is hilarious, blowing on the cartridge, which obviously if you don't know what that means, blowing on a Nintendo cartridge to get to work. The porn picture loading, which is hilarious. The cipher, stealing beer, underage drinking, bike pegs, pool shells, sneaker.
It's supposed to say puka shells. Actually, is what
puka shells. Sorry, puka shells. Sneaker pimps. You said Billy Blanks, and Billy Blanks was Tybo. You know what we talk about?
Tybo.
Tamagotchi, pagers, hip hop crew, hackers reference, the collective. Just so many. There's just so many great '90s references. So Patrick, what was your favorite 90s reference in Y2K?
Oh, there's literally, I think, 3 more pages of references. Those are just a few. But the one that had me howling, and this was like a little younger, like this wasn't quite 1999 for me. This was probably like more like 1996 or 7. But when Eli and Danny are sitting in I think it's Danny's room in the beginning of the movie, and they're sitting there talking shit, and behind Danny is a computer, like an old ass computer, like an old Dell or something, and it's slowly loading a porn picture. Like slowly loading a porn picture while they have a long conversation. They keep cutting back and forth between the two characters, and it's like it's barely loading one picture. That is literally what me and my friend did, who looked a lot like Danny, by the way, and I looked a lot like Eli when we were a little bit younger. That we would sit in his room and do exactly that. We would look up porn on the internet and it would just come up super, super fucking slow, like just inch at a time. It was so fucking hilarious that little detail was in there. It's like, yeah, it's just in the background if you're not paying attention, but it takes forever for one porn picture to load.
Okay, I don't know what it says about us as friends or podcast co-hosts, but that was literally my answer as well. Because I remember looking up nude photos on the internet for the first time on AOL dial-up and it loading so slow. And did you ever go as far as printing the picture when you get like a nude photo?
Oh, we printed pictures, 100%.
Because you're like, I'm never going to see this again, so you'd print the nude photo.
It took an hour for this one picture to load.
And it would come out.
Put it on the wall.
And the print was so grainy. Like,
shitty print.
You couldn't tell a nipple from a toe, but you printed it out and you wanted this naked photo. That was my answer. I'm not going to change it now because I'm like, holy shit, we know each other too well. That was literally my moment because I was like, oh my God. I remember when we got the internet for the first time. I remember, and I remember, so the first 2 things I did, not kidding, looked up lyrics to songs. Because not every album gave you the song lyrics. You get a lot of the CDs where they give you the lyrics. A lot of CDs didn't have it. So you're always like, what exactly did Eddie Vedder scream in that moment when he goes, you want to know what he says. So you look up the lyrics. And then the other was porn. Naked women.
Slow loading. Like you had to pass the time by doing other things while porn loaded.
And the other one I will say, I'll mention one other one that, oh my God, it spoke to me so much because I remember when I got my first desktop computer, we burned the shit out of CDs. I had a fucking, remember Case Logic, the Case Logic cases? I had like a
Yes.
700 case Logic filled with nothing but burned CDs of like all my favorite mixed CDs. I had so many mixed CDs. And by the
I've
way, I don't
never
know if
so
you
into
were.
that.
I was very much the guy that named his mixed CDs. So I'd be like the power metal, or I would say like sad songs that make me rock or some stupid shit like that. And I would have like compilation tapes, and I was very much like Rob from High Fidelity, where I had like a theme where I'd be like, you got to start off with a banger, but then you got to slow it down, you got to milk it, but then you got to build it back up again. I was very much that making my burn CDs. So that was the other one, the burn CDs. He has a Y2K mix in this movie, and he's like, "Put on the Y2K mix, man." He puts it in. They play the thong song, and it's a very iconic moment in the movie. But that was also me. I definitely had my own burn CDs.
Oh, we burned the shit out of CDs. You just had to. That was. Imagine having to physically curate your musical your music list and then burn it onto a CD and then carry that CD around with you places in those booklets. You're driving down the road like thumbing through your booklet, going, "Oh, there's Damon's Sex Time Jams. Let me put that one on right now."
Also, to that point, so you got timing. Remember back in the day when you first burned CDs, it'd take like an hour to burn a CD. Remember that? Like now, like before they stopped doing burn CDs, you could burn a CD in like 8 seconds. Like it would go in and pop back out, and it was done. But back in the day, you burned a CD, you had to be dead on with what you wanted, because it would take like an hour to burn this motherfucker. And it was like 12 songs, but it'd take like an hour to go on the disc. So that was the other thing, like waiting for porn and burn CDs.
Oh, what a time to be alive.
Oh, man. All right, Patrick, last category. Now, you always said, is it scary? Listen, we already said this is not that kind of movie. But I'm going to switch it up because we talked about it beforehand. So our last category, is it funny? I think we all know the answer.
Come on.
Y2K, is it funny?
Hilarious. Laugh out loud funny, gut busting funny, face hurt laughing so hard funny. This is a can't miss movie. I'm not exaggerating when I say that. Go see it as soon as you can. Go see it as soon as you can and bring a bunch of people with you. You're going to have a good time. You're going to laugh. Some of you are going to feel very nostalgic. Others of you are going to look at a ridiculous time period and know from two people who lived it that there's nothing exaggerated about what's going on in this movie, except for the part where the robots try to kill everybody. The rest of it is so dead on accurate. Like it should be put in, the Smithsonian. Like it is literally it is a stamp of an era captured perfectly on celluloid. So please, please, please go see Y2K and learn a little bit why Damon and I are the people that we are today, because we 100% came from what happens inside that movie.
It is hilarious. It is one of the funniest movies I've seen in years. I'm not kidding when I say that. Like It was dropped, like laugh out loud funny. And when you go to the Smithsonian, you're going to see Fred Durst's red Yankees hat, Kurt Cobain's sweaters from the 90s, and Y2K. Like that's like the perfect image of the 90s.
That's the 90s in three acts right there.
Yeah. It's just it is hilarious. Like it is so funny. And again, what I love about this is, like I said, even if you didn't grow up in this era, yes, if you grew up in this era, you're really going to like feel, like I said, this hit me in the nostalgia button over and over again. But even if you're not from this era, just like you didn't grow up in the 80s, but you enjoy Stranger Things, think of that same thing here, except this is a comedy more than it is like a, kind of a bit of a drama and sci-fi. This is more comedy / horror. But it is hilarious. Also, we didn't even mention, we talked about Franco Farkas being the asshole. The way he dies, he decides to skate a half pipe and he falls and busts his head and dies, which was just hilarious. Like, just the way they just off that character was hilarious. He's like, ooh, I got to skate this half pipe, and he just fucking falls off his board and dies. I was like, pretty apropos. So, this movie is brilliant. And like I said, we heap praise on movies a lot. This is very much like Strange Darling, where I'm like, I know this isn't going to get $1 million. I know this isn't going to get $1 billion to the box office. I know it's not going to be number one, but run, don't walk to go see this.
Yes, and for those of you who know that I make like a list of all the movies I've seen, I'm actually probably going to jump to Letterboxd for 2025 and start putting my lists there. But I always put a star next to the movies that I absolutely love from the year. Y2K got a star immediately. I was like, I fucking loved this movie. I cannot sing its praises enough. Go check it out. Support comedy in theaters. Support horror, because that's why you're in this podcast. But check out Y2K ASAP.
I saw it one night before you did, and when I texted you, like, when are you seeing Y2K? And you said Friday. I went and saw it Thursday. I knew in the back of my head, I was like, Patrick's going to enjoy this movie. But I did have a slight fear because nostalgia hits everyone a little differently. You know, not everyone loves nostalgia. And I was like, if Patrick hates this movie, I'm going to be so sad because it was so, it was just such a perfect representation of my youth in that era. And it was, again, it was authentic. It didn't feel, as you said, exaggerated or overbloated of like mocking the era. It was authentic to that era. And I was like, man, it's going to kind of break my heart a little bit if Patrick hates this movie. When you loved it, I was like, oh, thank God. Like, because I loved it so much. I was like, it's going to be kind of a bummer if we have to argue about why this movie is not, why I have to argue why this movie is great. So I'm so glad we were on the same page with this one.
Yeah, this was not going to miss. This is literally a snapshot of yours and mine history. So I love this movie very dearly, very quickly.
Absolutely. Well, there you go, folks. That is Y2K. Go check it out. It is in theaters right now. And again, I know probably a lot of people haven't seen this yet. If you listen to this podcast and you trust our judgment, please go see this movie. It is fantastic. With that being said, we appreciate everyone that tunes in each and every week to the show. Make sure you check us out on all of your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and our YouTube channel. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're trying to build our subscribers over there. Even if you don't watch us every week over there, just subscribe to the channel. It really does help us out with the algorithm and search results and all that good stuff. So please do that as well. And also find our podcast over on the website, rewindofthelivingdead.com, where you can also find horror news, reviews that we don't do on the show, trailers, all kinds of different stuff that I post over there. So rewindofthelivingdead.com. Check that out as well. You got questions, comments, movies you'd like us to review. Tell us your favorite moment from the 90s. I'd love to hear that. Hit us up anytime. Hit us up anytime on social media. Just search Rewind of the Living Dead on Twitter /X, Facebook, and Instagram. And you can also send us emails, rotlivingdead@gmail.com. That's rotlivingdead@gmail.com. And you can also find us on our own personal social media channels. I am at Damon Martin, and you are?
At Director Patrick.
Forgot my shit
for a second. Yeah.
At DJ Patrick.
At Patrick Guerra, Dragon Ball Z 69 at AOL.com.
Do you remember your AOL? Do you remember your AOL Instant Messenger name? Because I think mine was D-Rock. I think mine was D-Rock, if I don't remember, if I'm not mistaken.
I want to say my AIM name was RONO999 because Rono was my rap name. And 999 was 1999, so there you go.
I think mine was D-Rock. I can't remember for sure, but I think D-Rock.
D-Rock.
D-Rock, that's right, baby. All right, folks, that is our episode. We appreciate everyone tuning in as always. We'll see you next week for another edition of Rewind of the Living Dead. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you then.
Peace.